Welcome back, everyone, to the Homeric Epic Podcast. It feels like it's been a while since I last whispered in your ear, or shouted through your car speaker, or wherever you happen to be listening to this, so please forgive me. While I wish studying Homer's epic with you could be my full-time job, alas, I have yet to amass my fortune. I won't waste any more of your time, though. I know why you're here. The epic teichomachia, the battle around the wall of the Achaeans. Yes, like many of the 24 books of the Iliad, this one has some very memorable moments, which I will be discussing at the end of the episode, so as to not completely derail the flow of events within the book. Notable in this book is the description of the destruction of the wall by the gods in the far future, Sarpedon's speech on the code of the Homeric warrior, and Hector's, forgive my overuse of the term, epic breach of the wall. Of course, there's so much to say about all of this, so we had better dive on in. Let me quickly recap the events of Book 11 so we know where we stand. The heroes wake up after their night of antics and immediately arm themselves for battle. The Trojans have set up camp close to the Achaean wall, clearly planning to launch an attack the following day. We dive straight into Agamemnon's Aristeia, where he charges the Trojans and drives them back towards their defenses, until he takes a wound to the arm and has to fall back. With the retreat of Agamemnon, Hector seizes the moment and shifts the momentum, wounding several key Greek captains. Midway through the book, the narrative pivots, and we follow a wounded Greek, Machaon, as he's taken back to the camp in Nestor's chariot. From there, the perspective shifts to Achilles, who sends Patroclus to Nestor's tent to see what's going on. Patroclus arrives and delivers the news about Nestor's passenger, only to get roped into one of the old man's famously long-winded moral tales. Nestor tells a long story from his youth meant to guilt Patroclus into asking Achilles to return to battle. But then he mentions the fatal plan to him, that Patroclus should wear Achilles' armor into battle instead. The book closes just as Patroclus is heading back, only to stop and help a comrade returning from battle with an arrow in his thigh. We're left on edge, waiting to see what happens next. And here we are, about to hear what happens next. I know you must be on the edge of your seat. So while I have your attention, if you're enjoying this podcast, please consider playing it out loud in public somewhere, like on the subway or in an airplane. I'm sure the people around you will thank you for enlightening them, and you may just make a new friend along the way. Let me quickly cover what we're about to hear. The events of Book 12 are all pointing towards the end, when Hector will breach the wall, and in classic ring fashion, the book opens with the destruction of the wall after the war by Poseidon, Apollo, and Zeus. The narrative then returns to the present, and the assault on the wall begins, and Polydamas says they should dismount their chariots and cross the ditch. Most of the Trojans agree, except for Asios, who charges an open gate with his men. Two Achaean heroes make a stand and hold off the Trojans from the gate. Meanwhile, an omen is seen above the Trojan army of an eagle carrying a snake in its beak. The snake bites the eagle, who then drops it among the Trojans. Polydamas remarks to Hector that they will fail at taking the Achaeans, and this displeases Hector. He orders a forward motion and the assault begins. The Iantes defend the onslaught, and then Sarpedon makes a powerful speech to Glaucus before tearing off part of the wall. The fighting is very intense, but with this distraction from Sarpedon, Hector has the space to smash through the gates of the wall with a boulder, and the Trojans pour through the opening. Like I mentioned, Book 12 is quite unitary in its composition. It all serves to prepare and then glorify Hector's breach of the wall, and it does so in an unusual way. I'll just have to explain it. Let's start the analysis. Book 12 starts by reminding us when in the story we currently are. Patroclus is tending to the wound of Eurypylus, he has just left Nestor's tent, and he's on his way back to Achilles. Really shouldn't be that long of a journey, but we are only halfway through the poem. The poet needs to delay Patroclus' return to Achilles, because, as we learned in the last book, being sent out from Achilles to Nestor's tent was, quote, the beginning of evil for him, unquote. Thus, the poet takes this moment to preemptively tie up some loose ends. We are transported into the future, when all the best of the Trojans are dead and Troy has been sacked. The war is over, the Achaeans have gone home, most of them have made it, some of them will take a little longer than others, and now Poseidon is allowed to destroy the wall as Zeus promised him at the end of Book 7. Let's quickly revisit what was said by Poseidon to Zeus in Book 7 regarding the wall. Quote, Do you not see that now again the long-haired Achaeans have built a wall to defend their ships, and around it driven a ditch, but did not give to the gods illustrious hecatombs? Surely its fame will spread as far as the morning light, and they will forget the wall that I and Phoebus Apollo built for the warriors Laomedon with much toil. Then greatly troubled Zeus, who gathers the clouds, addressed him. O me, earth-shaker, whose might is wide, what kind of thing have you said? Some other god might fear this scheme, one who is much weaker than you in strength of hand and might. Surely your own fame will spread as far as the morning light. Go to then. Whenever the long-haired Achaeans again depart with the ships for their own fatherland, tear apart the wall and heap the whole of it into the salt sea, and bury again the entire great shore with sand, so that the Achaeans' great wall is obliterated. End quote. That is the sentiment expressed by the god of the ocean over the wall. Zeus says he's welcome to destroy it, but only after the war is over. Which brings us to Book 12, when we are told exactly how this occurs. Apollo diverts 9 rivers, Zeus reigns for 9 days, and Poseidon commands the waves to assault the wall to dislodge its foundations. It takes a tremendous amount of divine power to eventually destroy it, and in the end, no trace is left of the Achaeans or their wall. But why? Why does the poet go to the trouble of constructing the wall only to describe its destruction in the distant future? Why at this moment of the poem as well? I know, dear listener. There is much to say on this topic, so much in fact that I will have to save it for the end of the episode. I will say a few quick things about the passage, though. First of all, the rivers listed are in fact real rivers. Some are rather far away, so it's a bit strange that Apollo could recruit them to assist in destroying the wall. But hey, it's mythology. One river, though, garnered quite a bit of fame in the Hellenistic period. The Granicus, mentioned by Homer, was the site of Alexander the Great's first battle against the Persian army. Alexander, we are told in several sources, was a dedicated pupil of Homer. One anecdote describes him sleeping with a scroll of the Iliad under his pillow when he was young. He also stopped at the tomb of Achilles in the Troad, which was still standing at the time, and paid due honors to the hero. Alexander would have been deeply aware of the Iliad's connection to the land he was conquering, and I don't think the fact that his first decisive victory occurred at such a place would have been lost on him. We will return to the wall and all of its interesting theories, and press onwards with the assault of the Trojans. Transitioning from describing the future, the poet returns us to the present with a vivid simile of Hector. I'll quote it here in full, quote, "He, as before, fought on like a whirling storm wind, as when in the midst of dogs and hunting men a wild boar or lion wheels about, reveling in his strength, and the men array themselves like a wall of defense, stand to face him, and hurl from their hands volleys of spears. But never does his noble heart feel fear, nor does he flee, and his courage will kill him. And relentlessly he wheels about, testing the ranks of men, and wherever he charges, there the ranks of men give way. So Hector, going along the battle throng, turned and twisted, exhorting his companions to cross the ditch." End quote. Another simile extremely close-fitting to the situation at hand. I've discussed this before in episode 9 about the simile of the shepherds that occurs at the end of book 8. But what really makes a simile an epic simile comes down to a couple of things. Epic similes always evoke vivid, moving scenes. They have complex descriptions and often include living actors as the tenor representing a character, and long, multi-stage descriptions that paint the scene. Their length is another thing that sets them apart. But here what I'd like to focus on is the way the poet describes Hector through the simile of the boar/lion. In this simile, the boar is the tenor representing Hector, and he is described as reveling in his strength. The Greek word translated as reveling here is blemeainon, but it's often translated as exulting. Basically, the boar or lion is enjoying its strength. The hunting men are described as arraying like a wall, but the Greek word could also just mean a tower. But the notion of a defensive structure is clear, obviously meant to parallel the present assault on a defensive structure that Hector is taking a part of. so too do the men in the simile hurl spears at him, and so too does Hector wheel about the wall looking for an opening. The next line, though, is where reality and simile diverge, because in the story, Hector will feel great fear, and he will flee, both at the same time as he desperately flees Achilles around Troy. Perhaps this addition to the simile is meant to highlight how far Hector will fall in his final moments. Whatever it is, the rest of this line includes the most telling connection to Hector, one spelled out by his wife Andromache in their emotional meeting in Book 6, that Hector's courage will be his death. If we recall what Andromache said to her stubborn husband in Book 6, that is, quote, "Daimonie thise se to son menos." Translated a bit literally, "Inhuman one, your strength will be your death." Like the boar or lion, it is the lack of fear, the lack of the ability to recognize the danger it is in, that eventually kills it for all its strength. Homer manages to package the whole story of Hector into a single simile. And we are approaching the height of Hector's successes, and so in the moments of his greatest triumph, the poet reminds us of his eventual doom, a doom he builds for himself out of his very nature. But this simile has led to a functional problem for Hector. His horses will not cross the ditch in front of the Achaean wall, and indeed they should not want to, as we're told the ditch is crowned on either side with sharp stakes. Appearing always at critical junctures with sound advice, Polydamas speaks up with words of counsel for Hector. He says the obvious: if we bring the chariots into the ditch and dismount, we'll just get stuck and surrounded. It would be better to dismount, have our attendants hold the chariots before the ditch, and we can assault on foot. But crucially, Polydamas says one thing as well, quote, "Come, do as I say, let us all be persuaded. Assemble the horses and their attendants at the ditch, and let ourselves on foot, under arms with our weapons, all follow Hector in a body. Then the Achaeans will not stand if the shackles of destruction are fastened on them." End quote. Now, Polydamas' advice here is obvious. But remember, Troy is not a democracy. It's actually well before that. No, Troy is an absolute monarchy. We saw the effect of this in the council that the Trojans held at the end of Book 7. Some Trojans spoke out that, hey, we should return Helen. Paris said no, and then Paris' father, Priam, was like, yeah, we're probably not going to give her back. And that was the end of that. And this is how it is with Hector on the battlefield. He's the leader of the Trojan army, and his word is law. Thus, Polydamas can only provide advice, and Hector can choose to follow or not follow it. In this case, Hector does take the advice. It's pretty good advice. But one reason I believe he does is because of Polydamas' phrasing here. He suggests that the Trojans all follow Hector in a body, subtly appealing to Hector's growing belief in his power. Remember, just the day before, Hector won a great victory over the Greeks, nearly capturing Nestor and Diomedes, and only stopping because night began to fall. He must be feeling pretty good, so Polydamas' advice that he continue to lead at the head of the army finds favor with him. We will shortly see that not all of Polydamas' advice will be as favored by Hector, who struggles in the grip of his desire to destroy the Achaeans utterly. Next, the poet takes a moment for a roll call and arrays the Trojan forces against the Achaean wall in battle order. There are a couple of names to point out because they will get a moment in the spotlight during this book. The first is Asius, son of Hyrtacus, who in the very next scene will be the first to charge the gate that the Achaeans were pouring through. He gets a bit of attention as him and his men attempt to breach the entryway. The second is Sarpedon. We have discussed Sarpedon before in Book 5, where he dueled against the son of Heracles in single combat, and was grievously wounded and then healed by his father Zeus. He also harshly rebukes Hector in that book, criticizing his perceived reluctance to fight at the forefront of the host of the Trojan allies. We will touch more on Sarpedon when he delivers a fantastic speech later in this book. Anyways, the poet tells us the intention of the Trojans was to force the Achaeans back across their wall as a unit. But we are told that Asius breaks rank and charges at the place where the Achaeans themselves are returning. The gates remained open while the Achaeans let their own back through, but Asius charged right for it and brought his men with him, assuming the Achaeans would yield. They did not yield, in fact, just the opposite. 2 Achaean warriors, we are told, step out of the gate to hold back the onslaught, one named Polypoetes and the other named Leontis. Polypoetes, we are told, is the son of Perithous, who happens to be a famous hero in his own right. Perithous was best friends with the hero Theseus, and it was at the wedding of Perithous that the famous battle of the centaurs against the Lapiths occurred. This myth was much more popular in ancient times, and especially the Athenians held it in very high regard. On the Parthenon's south-facing side, the metopes, which are these rectangular spaces between the tops of Greek columns, the metopes were adorned with scenes of the teichomachia, which is the battle of the centaurs and Lapiths that occurred at Perithous' wedding. For reference, the other sides of the Parthenon depicted the Amazonomachy, the battle of the Athenians and the Amazons, the Gigantomachy, the battles of the gods and the giants, and the Trojan War. This strange myth was certainly of central importance to Athenian identity, and the mention of Perithous' son taking a brave stand at the wall against the Trojan onslaught would have been a point of pride for the people of Athens. Polypoetes and Leontius also get a great simile to mark their stand. Quote, "And the two Lapiths flew out the gates and began to fight before them, like two wild boars that in the mountains await an approaching band of dogs and men, and slicing slantwise smashed the woods around them, felling trees by the roots amid the grinding clatter of their teeth, until someone striking at them takes their lives." End quote. Picture the scene at hand. A chariot and a band of men are rushing forward, and the two warriors stand their ground in the gate. Like the boars surrounded by trees, the two heroes are centered in the gate, and there's this great imagery of them slashing sideways, covering the width of the area, not letting anyone pass, while the hunters and dogs attack them. Again, another example of a simile imbued with such movement and verve. Contrast this with one simile coming right up. We are told that around the Lapiths, the Achaeans are pouring down so many boulders that it is like a heavy snowfall. There will actually be one more snowfall-like simile in this book as well, and both serve to contrast the clamor of the battle with the stillness of snowfall, but also retain the important aspect of the simile, the sheer quantity and evenness of the snowfall and the stones being thrown. But back to Asius. He's cursing Zeus for the strong defense of the Achaeans, saying that he did not expect them to hold on so stubbornly. We then hear a list of Asius' warriors who are slain by Polypoetes and Leontius. Polydamas was obviously correct in his assessment of the situation, and this scene serves to show us what would have happened to Hector had he just charged the gate straight away. It also sets the stage with the fact that you should listen to Polydamas. He gives good advice. So as the Lapiths are stripping their victims of their armor, we return to the Trojans, and a peculiar thing happens. In full view of the heroes, an eagle flies from the right to the left, carrying an enormous red serpent in its claws. While the serpent is being carried off, it bends back up and bites the eagle on the breast. The bird screeches in pain and drops the snake in the midst of the Trojans. Now, besides this being just a bit of cool nature going on, we must try to see this through the eyes of the ancient people, who were, of course, immensely superstitious, especially when it came to birds and snakes. The seers in the Iliad are known for their augury, that is, their interpretation of bird signs. Calchas, the Achaean seer, is described in Book 1 as, quote, "far the most eminent of bird seers, who knew things that are, and things to come, and what had gone before," end quote. Seemingly, through his high knowledge of the birds, he knows the past, present, and future. Very impressive. Thus is the domain of knowledge presupposed by the Greeks to be possessed by birds, at least to a certain extent. So when an eagle, the bird of Zeus, flies from the right to the left, the most lucky direction, mind you, holding a live serpent, a portent of evil, well, you should probably perk up. And actually, regarding that serpent, it calls to mind the serpent that appeared to the Greeks at the beginning of the Trojan War, which was covered in Book 2. In this scene, Calchas interprets an omen where the army witnesses a snake eating 8 baby chicks, and then the mother bird as the 9th, meaning that the Greeks will take Troy in the 9th year. In this omen, the snake symbolizes the Greeks, eating the years of the war before finally being triumphant. So in the current bird sign, the fact that the eagle drops the snake before it can return home to feed it to its young means that the Trojans will not succeed in defeating the Greeks. Let me say outright that this is meant to be as clear as day to anyone witnessing it. So says Polydamas to Hector. And he doesn't sugarcoat it either. He starts his address to Hector as such, quote, "Hector, always somehow you fault me in assembly when I point out things that are best, since it seems it is not fitting that a mere citizen speak against you, not in council, nor even in war, but only ever to increase your might. Now, however, I will speak out as it seems best to me." End quote. Well, these are actually some very harsh words for Hector here, which seem to reference some broader grievances that Polydamas has. We've seen the authority that the royal house of Troy wields before, and its ability to silence any dissent. Polydamas alludes to this here, and the statement about the advice of the citizens, that Hector only accepts advice that increases his might, is quite fitting for the situation at hand. Polydamas was the one who suggested they assault the walls on foot. And before, when Sarpedon has given advice to Hector, Hector has simply accepted it without comment. But Polydamas knows Hector is not likely to agree with the advice he is about to give, and so he prefaces his interpretation of the bird sign with this posturing opening statement. And indeed, the advice that he gives will not please Hector, for the portent is clear to one such as Polydamas. He even says that even if they shatter both the gates and the wall, they will not be able to drive the Achaeans away. So clear is this sign from the gods. It's interesting that Polydamas mentions the gates and the wall, since in this book both will be breached by the Trojans. This rather heavy-handed foreshadowing by Polydamas serves to cast Hector's behavior into sharp scrutiny. Why is he stubborn about this? What are his motivations? This scene marks a visible change in Hector's attitude. He is at the height of his success. Zeus has personally assured him victory, and Polydamas' assessment of the bird sign is the exact opposite of this. But we in the audience can know the truth of the portent, and Homer has already described the doom that Hector is heading towards, although not directly. Previously, during Asius' reckless charge against the gates with his men, Homer said of him, quote, "The fool. He was not destined to elude evil death, as he gloried in his chariot and horses by the ships, nor to return back home to windy Ilion." End quote. Asius' reckless charge prefigures Hector's charge against the Achaeans, and it seems the whole Asius episode is there so the poet can make this comment obliquely about Hector. Unlike Polydamas' previous suggestion, Hector is not at all pleased with this verdict, and calls Polydamas a fool, saying the gods have deprived him of wits. Hector reminds him that Zeus personally granted him power earlier that day, and that he cares nothing for birds. He then goes on to call Polydamas a coward, and threatens him that if he hangs back or convinces someone else to desert the battle, Hector will kill him. This is the political structure of Troy in action. The king can do whatever he likes, and the opinions that don't align with this are not taken well. This extreme response from Hector against his chief counselor shows the desperation within him to destroy the Achaeans and keep Troy safe. Wait, or is it his desire for glory? See, now these two things, protecting Troy and obtaining Kleos, they're starting to become intertwined for Hector, and it's going to be difficult for us to say which one he is really striving for. So Hector orders an advance, and the Trojans begin the assault of the wall. The Iantes, in response, rally the Greeks to defend. Again, in the tumult and clamor, the poet employs a strange simile. Quote, "So shouting aloud, the two rallied the fighting throng of Achaeans, as flakes of snow pour down in drifts on a winter's day, when all devising Zeus begins to snow, showing to mankind these the shafts of his artillery, and hushing the winds to sleep, he heaps the snow steadily so that it shrouds the height of high mountains and peaks of cliffs, and blossoming lowlands and the rich worked lands of men, and the snow drifts the bays and the beaches of the grey salt sea, and the sea swells splashing it is stilled, and all else is cloaked from above, when the snows of Zeus weigh down, just so did the stones fly thick from both sides." End quote. Another strange snow simile, and this one much more elaborate. Besides its length and detail, the one thing that this simile does well is contrast with the current situation. As a foremost expert on snow, i.e. a Canadian, one of my favorite things about heavy snow is how quiet it makes things. Like super quiet, eerily, peacefully quiet. This quietness invoked by the simile transports us far, far away from the present situation of the noisy, gruesome plains of Troy. The poet wants to say, this is how far away from normalcy we are. We're the opposite of a peaceful, snowy winter's night. We are in war. While Hector and company continue their assault, we now switch focus to Sarpedon, son of Zeus. He is described as a hungry lion setting out to find a meal, and pausing before the wall brandishing his spears, he speaks to his companion Glaucus. This is a very famous speech from the Iliad, so it's best I quote it in full. Quote, Glaucus, why are we two esteemed beyond all, with seats of honor in Lycia, with cuts of meat and goblets filled, and all men looking on us as if on gods? And why are we allotted a great plot of land by the banks of Xanthos, a beautiful plot, with an orchard and wheat-bearing field? So we must now take our stand among the foremost of the Lycians and engage in searing battle, so that any of the close-armored Lycians may say, not inglorious are they, our kings, who hold sway over Lycia and consume fat, rich sheep and choice, honey-sweet wine. But, mark you, their strength is outstanding, since they fight with the front rank of Lycian men. O old friend, if we too escaping this war were destined to be ageless and deathless always, I myself would not fight in the front lines, nor would I send you into battle where men win glory. But now, since the fates of death stand by us in their thousands, which a mortal man cannot escape nor flee, let us go. Either we will give the right to vaunt to someone else, or he to us. So he spoke, and Glaucus did not turn back, nor did he disobey, and straight on they both advanced, leading the great host of Lycians. End quote. Whew, just a little bit to unpack here. This passage is playing into a historical theme that exists across many cultures, known as the noblesse obligée, which is French for the obligation of the nobility. It's a concept that we've kind of lost since modern society doesn't have nobility in the same sense that it used to. But back in the old days, there were clear distinctions between the classes based on whatever criteria was most relevant at the time. The noblesse obligée described by Sarpedon sums up the concept perfectly. He asks Glaucus, why do we receive the great honors that we do? We are kings, after all. But why? He then proceeds to tell and show Glaucus. Sarpedon states that the honors they receive are because of their bravery and willingness to fight in the front ranks of troops as leaders. They are not inglorious, akleos in Greek. They are brave, and their strength is outstanding. So it's a transactional relationship. The kings get to be kings because they're brave, worthy leaders. And when it's time to be a brave, worthy leader, you got to do stuff like jump right into battle. This transactional relationship underpinning the heroic code is rife throughout the Iliad. In the first book, when Agamemnon steals Briseis, Achilles' honor as a king is threatened because of this code. In Book 6, when Andromache is begging Hector to come inside the walls to defend Troy, Hector's response is basically, no, I'm the leader, and I fear the shame more than death that would come if I do not fulfill my obligation as leader. And while this code underpins the hero's behaviors, and in certainly some sense may be seen as noble, one of the main questions raised by the Iliad is, so what? Why? Why should I engage in this transactional code of honor and gifts? Achilles questions the core of the heroic code. What is the point of risking one's life for prizes of honor? In Book 9, Ajax and Phoenix point out that within this code that Sarpedon has described, Achilles is acting irrationally by not accepting the gifts. Achilles himself even admits this, that he should take the gifts, but he just can't. His rage at the hurt from Agamemnon transcends the code by which up until this point has directed his life, and now he just doesn't know what to do, so he sits by the ships. The heroic code manifests in numerous ways throughout the Iliad, but nowhere else so clearly as this speech by Sarpedon. But why here? Why Book 12? The poet has actually chosen the moment very well, as this is the chapter where Hector seals his fate. Polydamas has mentioned that moving forward is dangerous, as the omen of the eagle and the snake showed, yet Hector urges forward. This is Hector's tragic yet noble choice. The code which actuates him and his world urges him towards his death, and he knows it. He told his wife this just a couple days ago. Despite the signs to the contrary, the man must push forward out of desire for eternal glory. And it is at this point that the poet tells us why. A quote from E.T. Owen's Story of the Iliad sums it up best. Quote, out of hopelessness, he, Hector, will not make hope, but glory. End quote. Sarpedon explicitly articulates this when he says, if they could be immortal, then they wouldn't fight. but since they cannot escape death, they will try for the next best thing, glory. After so eloquently relaying to Glaucus the exact premises upon which he lives his life, Sarpedon enters the fray. The Achaeans spy him and send for the Iantes, who arrive to defend the Lycian assault of the walls. The greater Ajax throws a stone at someone, and Teucer the archer wounds Glaucus in the arm, forcing him to retreat. Sarpedon is not ignorant of the wounding of his companion, and after dispatching one more Achaean, he seizes the wall with both hands and heaves it down, creating a passage for many. And true to character, as Sarpedon is battered by spear and arrow from Teucer and Ajax, he gives way a little, but, quote, he did not withdraw entirely since his spirit was hoping to win glory, end quote. You gotta admire the ones who talk the talk and walk the walk. This advance of the Lycians towards the breach in the walls and the rerouting of the Iantes towards it opens a path for Hector's contingent towards the now much less defended gates. This sequence of events illustrates the poet's dilemma when presenting things happening simultaneously, since he can only sing linearly in time. He must present things as happening in a sequence, despite the machinations of battle happening in real time. The outcome is that first Sarpedon must advance and then draw the Iantes away, and then Hector can charge only while Sarpedon tears down the wall. Realistically, these things would happen in much closer succession than presented in the text, but such are the limitations of the medium. As the Lycians storm the wall and the Achaeans resist them, we are treated to a very strange simile. I want us to remember the context of this situation here. An army is trying to assault a gigantic wall. Any war movie depicts this as a bloody, brutal struggle between those above and those below. The scene is one of intense violence, and we were just told the rocks thrown by the defenders fall thick as snow on the heads of the attackers. So when the poet says this, quote, yet still the Trojans were not able to make a rout of the Achaeans, but they held on, as a woman careful in her poverty holds her scales, and holding a weight and her wool, one on each side, she raises them to balance equally, so as to gain for her children a meager pittance. So their fighting and the line of war were pulled tight and equal. End quote. What is up with this? We move abruptly from the midst of battle to a poor woman weighing wool? Why is that? Well, very commonly with Homeric similes, we are transported far away from the current location, the bloody plains of Troy, and back into the domestic sphere of life. One of the purposes of this is juxtaposition of war and the regular state of human affairs. The poet demonstrates great sensitivity for these everyday human troubles that no doubt audience members of the poet have experienced firsthand. There is an interesting scholia in the Iliad about this wool-weighing scene that says, quote, the equal balance of those fighting, Homer, compared to the beam of a loom, again, for nothing is so precisely similar to an even balance. And the one weighing this out is not the mistress of the household, for she does not often trouble this much for so small an equal bit, nor is it one of the household maids, for they would not seek to make so precise a measure since they are fed by the household's master and do not risk their nourishment if they mess up the loom weights. But it is a woman for hire who must provide what is needed for living by the effort of her hands. End quote. Now this scholia is part of the D family of Homeric scholia, which has been traced to the 5th and 4th centuries BC. The insight that it gives on the simile is fascinating. The case is made that the reason the poet chose a poor woman is to emphasize how carefully she is incentivized to weigh the scales. Her life and the life of her children depend on precisely weighing the wool, and the balance required is, strangely, applied to the struggle about the wall between the Achaeans and Trojans. The reason this simile is chosen is to emphasize the desperation and precarious state of the Trojans in their struggle against the Achaeans. For a brief moment, we see this woman in poverty, struggling to survive and provide for her children, and her plight is expanded to encompass the plight of a whole city fighting for its life. Now, you may have noticed that the poet has been at great pains to emphasize the difficulty of breaching the Achaean wall in this book. We've had great similes of the defenders warding off attacks, similes of attackers as great beasts, and similes on how even the fighting is. We had Sarpedon's amazing exhortation to Glaucus about why they fight, but we also had the omen of the eagle and the snake that made clear to us that the assault would not be successful. Even before this, we traveled to the far future after the war where Poseidon, Apollo, and Zeus, in their might, destroyed the wall with immense power, emphasizing that this is what it takes to break the wall. As a whole, Book 12 has been pointing towards this great action, Hector breaching the wall. And now it is time. Hector shouts to the Trojans who begin to scale the wall and, well, I'd better just quote this part. Quote, "While Hector, seizing a rock, carried it with him, a rock that stood before the gates, blunt at the bottom, but sharp it was on top, a rock that the two best men of the country could not without effort heave from the earth to a wagon, such as mortal men are now. But he with ease brandished it, and on his own. The son of devious Cronus made it light for him, as when a shepherd easily carries the fleece of a ram, picking it up with his left hand, and the burden weighs little on him. So Hector, lifting the stone, bore it straight for the doors that close guarded the gates, tightly fitting a towering pair. 2 bars inside, crossing each other, held it, and a single bolt was fitted on. He went and stood close, and taking a firm stance, he struck them in the middle. His legs straddled wide so that his blow lose no force, and shattered both hinges. The stone fell inside under its own weight. The gates groaned loud on either side. The bolts did not hold. The doors were sundered in every direction by the blow of the stone. Glorious, Hector sprang at them, his face dark like the rushing night. He shone with the dreadful gleam of bronze that he had put about his body. In his hands he held 2 spears. No one coming against him could have restrained him except the gods when he leapt through the gates, and his eyes blazed with fire." End quote. So much going on here. As with other epic rock tosses, we have the comparison of the heroes of old to men such as they are nowadays. This rock is described as trouble for even 2 men to lift into a wagon, yet Hector manages to lift it overhead with ease, even carrying it for a ways. His lift is compared to a shepherd carrying a ram's fleece easily in his left hand, so nonchalant. Notice these comparisons are delaying, drawing out, and heightening the action. The poet holds us between the beginning and the fulfillment of Hector's deed as he approaches the door. His stance is wide and he smashes the gate, the stone crashing to the ground and the hinges exploding out. In comparison to his slow, labored approach of the door, is Hector's speed and alacrity upon breaching and opening. His face is like the rushing night, dark and hidden in a blur, yet his armor shines dreadfully and his eyes blaze with fire. Then the line, no one could have restrained him except the gods. If ever there were a sign that a hero was at the height of his prowess and ability, it would be this exact scene. The stage was set, and Hector has delivered in his performance. And just like that, the Trojans rush over and through the wall, and the Danaans flee toward the ship, drawing Book 12 to a close. Before I end this episode, there is one thing we need to discuss about Book 12. What is up with the wall? Let's think about the wall since its inception. It was conceived on the 24th day of the Iliad, during the night following Book 7, and it then doesn't feature very prominently, besides a few locational mentions, until now in Book 12. The opening of Book 12, with Poseidon, Apollo, and Zeus obliterating it in the future, is a very strange way to start, and is no doubt meant to bookend this chapter with Hector's breach of it. Yet, throughout the Iliad, the wall still stands. It will be there until the last book, and then well after the Iliad, and then well after the sacking of Troy. Such are the narrative peculiarities of the wall, but what about its existence in the first place? Why did they only build a wall in the 9th year of the war? Why does Nestor suggest it at such a random time? And why are we privy to its eventual destruction? Like many things, there might not be an answer. But here are some of the explanations that I find most satisfying. I'll first go over the narrative strangeness of the wall. Why build it now? As I've mentioned before, the Iliad only covers 54 days out of a 10-year war, a mere sliver of time. Yet, throughout the Iliad, we are told about events that occur in the past and the future of the Trojan War. Events like the omen of the snake and the baby birds that is described in Book 2. This event is from the very outset of the Trojan War, when they were launching the ships from Aulis. This early event of the war occurs early on in the story, so the beginning of the Iliad mirrors the beginning of the war. Same reason for the catalog of ships. Why would the army need to do a roll call at this time? Well, we are at the beginning of the story, of course. And also, such a roll call would have occurred the first time the warriors assembled as well. So what about the end of the war? Troy is still standing at the end of the Iliad, but its destruction is represented in a different way, through the death of Hector. It's mentioned numerous times, most tragically by Andromache, that if Hector dies, the city is done for. And he does die. So in that sense, the end of the Iliad is the end of Troy. The rest is just delaying the inevitable. So in this same sense, the building of the wall relatively early in the Iliad mirrors events from the start of the Trojan War. Now, it occurs in Book 7, I know, but certainly it occurs before a lot of the major events happen. And specifically, after Menelaus and Paris have a duel, which is the logical first thing to do upon arriving at Troy. Make the boys settle their differences. After the disappointing outcome of the duel, the Greeks are kind of locked into the siege, so building a wall then makes a bit more sense. I like this approach for explaining some of the awkward events in the Iliad. It also shows why it was so popular, because in a single story you have the shapes of many other stories, which would lend it to being remembered, cherished, and copied. So that's maybe why there's a wall in the first place. But what about its destruction? Well, that obviously is tied to its construction. When it was built, Poseidon claimed that the glory of the Achaean wall would outshine the walls of Troy, which he and Apollo built for Laomedon over a generation before. And think about that. Why would Poseidon, a god, worry about this? Surely the walls of Troy are more impressive than this wall that the Achaeans threw together in one night. Now don't worry, the walls of Troy are much more impressive than this wall. They are impregnable. The only way they eventually get inside is with the Trojan horse, right? And in this very book, we see both Sarpedon and Hector damage the Achaean wall. So Poseidon's outburst does not stem from the fact that it is an impressive wall, but is more there to justify that it is. It is a wall worthy of great heroes to break. This comment by Poseidon also ties into the gods as a comedic foil for the heroes. We've seen their petty squabbles before in Book 5 during the exploits of Aphrodite and Ares against Diomedes. But in the passage from Book 7, notice what Zeus does not promise to do. See, Poseidon was worried that the fame of the Achaean wall would eclipse the wall of Troy, and Zeus said, hey, after the war is over, we can destroy the wall. But Zeus did not say they would destroy the fame of the wall. And just in case you are wondering, the Greek word for fame used here is kleos, the same undying fame that the heroes strive for. I think this connection between the fame of the wall and the fame of the heroes is intentional. A central theme of the Iliad is the choice between a long, happy, but forgotten life, or a short one that gives undying fame. This is the destiny Achilles is told he holds from his mother. The gods in the Iliad, of course, have both. They are both famous and undying. But fame is the only form of immortality available to mortals. To make his heroes immortal, Homer has to destroy them. So he invents them only to kill them, and in doing so cements their greatness forever. Just like the wall. It is not the creation of the wall that cements its greatness. It is its destruction over 9 days by 3 gods. So too with Hector, so too with Patroclus, and so too with Achilles. It is the process of their destruction which affords them the kleos that will be their immortality, the same kind given to the great wall of the Achaeans. Of course, the destruction of heroes is much more tragic and felt so much more deeply than the destruction of a monument. But I think the poet is trying to tell us something about the fame that the heroes desire, that you'll pay for it. With that, I'll bring this episode to a close. What a book that was. I always catch myself thinking, oh, this should be a simple story, it just sits between event X and Y, should be easy. Wrong. Every book is carefully, intricately crafted, and I can only hope to unravel a little more with every read. One thing that really struck me with Book 12, though, is how thematically complete it is. I think I've said this about another book of the Iliad after writing the episode, actually, which just goes to show the intricacy of this story. But it is quite obvious how Book 12 is bookended with the destruction of the wall in 2 different ways. It also entirely points to Hector's breach of the wall, and the events contained in it, while so epic and cool, could be summed up with the sentence, "and Hector breaches the gate." But that wouldn't be very much fun, would it? As always, if you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, or follow me on Substack to get all the episodes and anything else I find interesting on the Homeric epics, all for free. Until then, erostai akustoi philoi.